Hi, welcome. I'm Dr. Brennan Roach, and you're here for another episode of a virtual tour of the Holy Land. And today we are going to Tel Dan. Now, Tel Dan is an amazing place, like all the places that we visit. And today we are going to visit the Temple of Tel Dan. Next week, we're going to look at the Israel Gate at Tel Dan. But today's episode is all about the Temple at Tel Dan. Critically important for us to understand what's happening there. And we hope that you enjoy our latest episode of a virtual tour of the Holy Land. The oldest version of the Bible had a little palace where he could stop overnight. Whoever interprets the dream has incredible power. If you're going from Jerusalem to Jericho or vice versa, you stop somewhere here and rest overnight. Near the caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. This is actually a pagan type place. It's a very likely place where Peter preached his first sermon. Some very significant, important events happen at this location. Hi, I'm Dr. Brennan Roach, and this is a virtual tour of the Holy Land. And today we are at Tel Dan, the place of control. So the place of control is Tel Dan. So we're having a look today at Tel Dan, and it's a very important city. It's a very important city in the production of the Holy Land and what's actually happening here. So let's go to our slide presentation, and we see the ancient remains of Tel Dan there, and we'll go back and we'll have a look through the different elements and the different parts of that. But it's actually a very impressive, well-preserved site. So there's a lot of information. We know a lot about this site, and we're going to have a lot to tell you that's important about this location and this site. So Tel Dan was an important city in the north of Israel. It was a gateway city. What do you mean by gateway city? A gateway city was a city that was located on an important road. It was where most of the travelers and most of the trade would come through. So it was important, and it had great power and influence because of its location and because it was an incredibly fertile area. It was a place of significant farming and agriculture, and it was very close to Mount Hermon and Caesarea Philippi. Now, the ancient temple of Tel Dan was what we see and what we know and what we understand and what I'm going to call the place of control. So what do we call the place of control? It was established by the kings of the northern 10 tribes of Israel. So this is where it can get a little bit confusing. So we will call them the kingdom of Israel from this point in time. But the kingdom of Israel in the Bible refers to the 10 northern tribes once they broke away. So it's not all the tribes together, it's the 10 northern tribes. The southern tribes of Benjamin and Judah, which is where Jerusalem is in the southern parts of Israel, they remain faithful. That's where the Jerusalem temple was. But what we actually see here is that the northern tribes break away to assert power and control over their people for political power, for strength, for military power. In other words, nothing's changed in thousands of years. People still want to control other people when they're rulers and when they're powerful people. Rulers are often looking to exert power and control over others, and that's what we're seeing here. And this is what we call it this is why we call it the place of control. So let's review our journey so far. In this season, we've been to Caesarea Philippi, which is the place of the source of the Jordan River. It was an influential battlefield between the Roman gods and the Jewish God, and it was an important place that was located there. It was the place where Peter said to Jesus, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And then we went up and we climbed up from there, up to Mount Hermon. You can see all of these are bunched very closely together. My poor attempt at a map there doesn't do it justice, but they're incredibly close together. Climbing up Mount Hermon, the place of transformation, or you remember that's where the transfiguration happened, where people are being transformed. And today we're going to visit the temple at Tel Dan, the place of control. So that's where we are located on the map. And hopefully that gives you a good understanding that this is just behind a location, just behind where the temple is, and you can sort of walk up and you can sort of go around a couple of 100 meters and you get this great view of Mount Hermon. So again, that gives you a very good idea of where we are and how close we are to the temple. Sorry, how close we are to Caesarea Philippi and how they're incredibly closely located together. In fact, it's less than a 5-kilometer walk to walk from Caesarea Philippi to Mount Hermon. So that's another important point, how close it was. And it'd be fair to actually say that that Caesarea Philippi was the Roman city and Tel Dan was the Jewish city, both controlling the same region at the same point in time. So when are we? When are we in this point in time? When are we in this place in history? Oh, we've got a few more slides here. So this is a nice little aerial slide, which shows us on the my left-hand side, we can see here we've got the Roman, sorry, we've got the Hebrew gate, and the gate of Abraham is called on the right-hand side. We've got the temple gate, and right there, sorry, let me go through that again. Okay, so down the bottom, we've got what's known as Abraham's gate, and then on the left-hand side of the PowerPoint, we actually see that's where we've got the temple, and on the right-hand side of the PowerPoint, we can see a little portion of buildings there, and that's where the actual gate is. So hopefully this will help explain it. We can see a tourist map from the site. Again, we can have a look at the top left-hand side of the map, and that's where the temple is located. And we see on the right-hand side of the map, that's actually where the gate is located. So as you can see, it's a beautiful nature park. It's a beautiful location. You can go there and you can really enjoy a day out. So when are we? So at this point in time, we are pre-772 BC, before Christ, before the Assyrian deportation of the 10 northern tribes. So the biblical story is there's one nation, breaks into two. We've got the southern tribes, we've got the northern tribes, and the northern tribes remain separate and independent for near on 200 years until the Assyrians come in, capture the northern tribes. The Assyrians come down and try to conquer Jerusalem, but they're defeated. And the story where not one arrow is flown against the city of Jerusalem. So that's the time frame that we are in. And let's go back, and we're going to have a look and you sort of say, well, why did these northern tribes go off on their own? Well, there was actually, the northern tribes were actually looking, it was again about the issue of control, but the northern tribes were had entered, ironically, a period of great prosperity. Now, most people would associate a period of great prosperity with, well, God is blessing us, we're doing the right thing. And that's certainly the world we live in today, where people who are living a prosperous life will quite often have a look around and say, oh, I must be doing the right things in God. But you have a look around and you go, I can't understand why that person who's doing this is wealthy or is blessed, and why this person is wealthy and is blessed. This person doesn't follow God. This person's directly going against God, yet they have so much wealth and prosperity and money. Well, that's the time frame. That's the point in time that we're living here. The 10 northern tribes have started to incorporate the Egyptian gods, the Baal gods, and what we're actually seeing there is this great overwhelming sense, and this is where you start to see in other parts of the Old Testament, the prophets coming and talking about the Baal god, as Elijah calling down fire, and all of those things are happening because we've now entered a place where the one true God, the mixing of the one true God worshipping is being mixed with the Baal gods, being mixed with the Egyptian gods. The Baal gods are the Canaanite gods, the local gods. So all of this mishmash is happening, yet the 10 northern tribes are incredibly blessed, incredibly prosperous. And of course, during that time, prosperity, greed kicks in for the kings, and they want more power, more wealth, more control, and it continues on. So, but true to the worship of understanding of what's actually happening in God, it all falls apart eventually. But we actually see, as part of this process, the temple at Dan and the temple at Bethel is actually created to keep people happy so they don't have to go to Jerusalem to worship. So we'll talk a lot more about that. But I just want to show you a nice little video clip of uh, going into. So today we're going to be having a look at two videos, and we're going to actually, the first one is going to be a beautiful walk through this nature park, and we find ourselves coming up to the temple precinct. The second one we're going to show at the end, which is a recording I did many years ago with a group of students talking about the metaphor of the Jordan River, and we did that at Tel Dan as well, because of course, as we've spoken about, Caesarea Philippi and Tel Dan is the starting points of the Jordan River. So you'll actually see a lot of water flowing. You'll see a very lush green area, and we'll have a look at that. So let's play our first video clip as we go through a nice little in the biblical account are the temple at Tel Dan, so the temple or the sacrificial site, and the Israel, what we're going to call the Israelite gate. So those are important features that we'll look. So today we're actually having a discussion, and we're looking at and we're talking about the temple at Tel Dan. The temple at Tel Dan is the surviving temple complex from the biblical northern kingdom, and the Bible attributes its establishment to King Jeroboam I, who led the northern succession from Judah in 930 BC to establish the northern kingdom of Israel. There are very real and practical reasons why the temple was actually established and built here at Tel Dan. So, of course, this is the time King David and Solomon build the temple. And so hundreds of years later, they're saying they need other temples. So why do they want other temples? They want other temples because for three very simple reasons when it comes to power and influence and control. It gave the northern kingdom political power. So it said, we have our own structures. We have our own temple. We're not dependent on you. We're not going to listen to you. We're not going to take instructions from the southern kingdom anymore. It gave the northern kingdom spiritual power. By having their own temple, it actually gave them spiritual power, which again was a rebut and a direct attack against the southern kingdom. And also, it was for financial power or financial influence. The temple in Jerusalem, it talks about Solomon's temple being overlaid with gold and silver and jewels and just magnificent. Why? Because it became incredibly wealthy on the back of people coming and bringing their annual and other sacrifices to the temple. So the king goes, I want the money, I want the finance, I want the power, I want the control. So it's really again very straightforward. We don't have to think too far away from human nature and how political leaders act today. So to prevent the northerns from making the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, Jeroboam put a temple at the very north, and this is where we are at Tel Dan now, and in the very south of the northern kingdom, which was in Bethel, which meant that the people from the northern tribes, the 10 northern tribes, didn't have to travel down to Jerusalem, which was significantly further than Bethel or Tel Dan. So if you're in the northern half of Israel, if you're from Galilee, sort of Nazareth north, you could go up to the northern temple and you'd be very happy to go there. And if you're in Galilee or down to the southern areas, you'd be very happy to go to Bethel. It's short, it's quick. You don't have to travel there for 10 days, like from Nazareth or Nazareth to get there and back and all the hassle of that. No, rather you can just take a couple of days or literally just go walking around the corner in the matter that it was of Tel Dan if you were farming in that particular area. So at each of these temples and shrines, King Jeroboam set up a golden calf. So this becomes a really critical issue. He sets up a golden calf, and he also brings in other traditions of worship from Egypt as well as still worshiping Yahweh, because of course the people want to worship their one true God. But as we'll see, the gods that were popular and worshipped there around prosperity and wealth. So if one god doesn't give you prosperity and wealth, another god will give you prosperity and wealth, which created huge confusion in the minds of the people of the Israelites, because they had the kings and the priests who were telling them to worship a variety of gods and essentially come and make sacrifice. We don't really care which one you choose, just as long as we get the money. Show me the money. So we see here that we now go in and let's have a look at the verse of scripture, Kings 12:26-31. Then Jeroboam said to himself, now the kingdom may well revert to the house of David if this people continue to go and offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem. The heart of this people will turn against their master, King Jeroboam of Judah, and they will turn again to their master, King Rehoboam of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam of Judah. So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. He said to his people, you have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Here are your gods, O Israel, and brought them out of the land of Egypt. He set one in Bethel and he set the other in Dan, which is where we are now. And this thing became as a sin, for the people went to worship before the one in Bethel and before the one as far as Dan. He also made other high places and appointed priests from among the people who were not Levites. So once you start pulling apart the rules of worship as defined in the Old Testament, in the Bible, particularly in the first 5 books, you are completely destroying. So you remember the priests were the Levites, were sons and children of Aaron from the tribe of Levi, and they were dedicated, the only people who could be priests. And Jerusalem was set aside as well for the place of worship. So once you start to pull at these things and inserting a golden calf and other things, which was clearly still, I think, what the people felt had some sort of pull on them, as this was the golden calf. Remember, this is the golden calf that they worshipped when Moses was up on the top of the hill. So it all makes sense when we start to bring all the elements of the story together. So let's have a look at a nice diagram from an archaeological design team. And we can see here with this diagram that it gives us a good idea. We can see the burnt altar at the front with the 4 horns on it. We can see the steps going up where that open space was where the golden calf was located, the primary place. And we see some chambers at the back. And if you look across to the top or the left-hand side of the slide, you can see, and we'll talk a little bit about some of these chambers along the left as well. So this is of particular interest because the temple complex here at Tel Dan would have been mimicking or built around the same idea as the temple complex at Jerusalem. So you come in, there's a place to wash of the sacrifices, the burnt offering, and then there's what we would call the Holy of Holies, but we're not going to give this temple that sort of level of respect. We're just going to call this the sacrificial, or the place where the golden calf was located. So this helps us actually understand what the temple structures would have actually been like as well, because these temples, the temples in Bethel and Tel Dan, were copied and modeled off the temple in Jerusalem. So here we see again this is the current day of what it looks like, and this is sort of looking at it from the side. We've got this huge tree which has grown in place after the excavation was finished, and they're just leaving it there, which isn't a bad thing. You can sit on the steps, have a bit of a chat about the site, and you enjoy actually being there in the shade. You can see here again the altar. It was quite large. So this is, you can imagine that's sort of about that space there is about half the size of a basketball court, and this altar is maybe 2 meters high, so it's taller than me. It's quite large and impressive, and that's where the animals would be coming and offered as a burnt offering. And then you head up the right, up the steps, and that's where you find, on that platform, that's where you'd find the golden calf. And across the back is where you see basic storage areas and things like that for the temple itself. So for people to be able to come in and worship here, it's a small area. So again, it's probably to get into this space, you probably would have had to be paying a lot of money. Maybe you would have been stopped at the temple gate and forced to give your offering at that particular point in the place there. So now we have a look and we can see some of the other artifacts that are being found. These are little shovels. So when they're burning altar and incense, so not from the big sacrifices, when they're also burning incenses, as again, you've got the incense being burnt and the smoke going up to God as a prayer, okay? So these were what we call, these were shovels that were used in that process of the burning of incense. And you can see across the left, that's just the physical location where these elements and these sacrifices were actually found and located. We go on to the next images, and these are the one on the right is the god Bees, and the one on the left is maybe a local Canaanite god dancing. Remember, we talked about the dancing goats and the idea of the nymphs and other minor gods dancing. That's probably one of these minor gods that's involved with the dancing goats, or another dancing symbol. Nobody really knows exactly what that one's about, apart from the fact that he's dancing. So a little bit of celebration. And Bees, the god here, is quite an interesting one, because Bees is an Egyptian god, and it's based on it's on people who have dwarfism. Okay, so little people or people who are small in stature. Now, in the Egyptian world, these people were highly revered. They were seen as special. They were seen as having a special characteristic or specially selected of God. So they were highly revered individuals. It's not like maybe it was in many countries of the world or other places where they're denigrated or seen to have something wrong with them, but they're actually seen that they were highly revered individuals. And so the Bees god was an ancient Egyptian god, and he was very popular with the Egyptian people, and he became very popular in this part of the world because he protected women and children above all others. So if you wanted your wife and your children, or your wives and your children protected, this was the Egyptian god that you would go to. It's also clear from the golden calf and the other Egyptian gods that were present at this place that the Egyptian gods, for whatever reason, was preferred. And I would suggest to you that it was for political reasons, because the king wanted to have a good relationship with Egypt. So that meant worshipping the Egyptian gods. Because when you look at the region, Egypt was incredibly wealthy. They had so much gold that silver was more precious than gold. So if you were going to Egypt and you had a look at some of the things, some of the tombs, you would see gold everywhere. And then you would just see small amounts of silver. Why? Because gold was incredibly common and silver was incredibly precious. So just a different way of thinking and looking about things in the ancient world. So the Canaanites and other people saw all of this wealth. The Nile produced huge amounts of food, and so it was very secure when all the other regions around them were quite poor, didn't have natural resources, so to speak of, and quite often go through droughts, as we know, which meant the people would be hungry and poor. So the Egyptian gods were also very popular as the local Canaanites, or what we call the Baal gods, as we start to go through this. But what we actually start to see and understand through this location is that there was always a temptation to go back to these local gods or the Egyptian gods, because it was in a region that would have droughts, and people would quite often starve, and there would be this drawing back to try and secure your, what we would call in today's world, food security, which they were incredibly insecure. So the priests and the kings, particularly the northern tribe and of Israel, you had the good kings and bad kings, they took advantage of this. And the priests and the kings were admonished for going away from worship of the one true God. So they were ultimately responsible. The priesthood was ultimately responsible. The king was ultimately responsible. So what does the Bible say about this? About the priesthood in particular, it says, "But you priests have left God's path. Your instructions have caused many to stumble. You have corrupted the covenant I have made with the Levites, says the Lord." So Malachi's the last book of the Bible, and all the way through from this period of time in history, the priesthoods were responsible for keeping worship holy and pure before God, but at many times they became corrupted. They were influenced by the king. They were influenced by other leaders. They were influenced even by the people to not actually keep holy and pure. So it's quite interesting. So what are the lessons that we've learnt from Tel Dan? We learnt that prosperity does not equal approval from God. So really get a hold of this one. Just because you are financially prosperous does not mean that God is blessing your activity. Okay, let's say it again. Just because you are financially prosperous does not mean that God is blessing your activity, particularly when you're going away from the fundamentals of Scripture and what the Bible is teaching. And then the second thing that we learn, the king should focus on ruling and let the priests and pastors, if I put it into modern day terminology, the priests and the pastors focus on God. So when the kings try and take all power and control, spiritual power and control, things blow up. When the priests go away from God, things blow up. So let the priests and the pastors lead the people in worship to God. So, Temple of Dan, what's our conclusion? In any attempt to remain in control and to keep the popularity of the people, the kings of the northern tribes mix the practices of the one true God with the practices of the Egyptian and Baal God. It is a warning for today that the relentless pursuit of popularity will always end in disaster. I'm Dr. Brennan Roach. This has been the Temple of Tel Dan, the place of control. Hang around now for some additional teaching. We're going to finish off with, and then we'll just cut. I won't be talking anymore. We're going to finish off with my teaching on the beginnings of the Jordan River and the metaphor of sin that we find there. I hope you've enjoyed our day, and I hope you've enjoyed our teaching on Tel Dan. Goodbye. We'll see next episode. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about the Israelite gate. Hang on for that one as well. That'll be to you very, very soon. But we're going to finish off with another teaching on the Jordan River. God bless. Goodbye. Have a great one. Here we are at the beginning of the River Jordan, and as we have a look down here, I think it's fascinating, another example of water coming out of a rock. When it talks about water coming out of a rock, we think of, I always did of a miraculous sort of, Moses comes and hits the rock and water comes out. Well, water coming out of a rock is, Mount Hermon is just over the back. Again, we've come from Bunyas. We're just a little bit further up the road here at Tel Dan. And so the snow melts and it goes down through and hits a layer of rock, which it can't go any further because it's not porous. And then it literally, you have like underground streams and water and things like that. And so eventually that's got to come out somewhere. And so that comes out and it flows out in several different places around Israel and Egypt and all those sort of things. So when they would look for a place where there mightn't necessarily be any water or any rainfall, but the water could literally flow for tens of kilometres or hundreds of kilometres when we think about Egypt, and the water literally appears to be coming out of the rock. So when we're thinking about those stories of Moses coming and striking the rock, it's actually the water flowing from another place and eventually coming out in a spring or a rock or something like that. But what I wanted to talk about is a little bit of a metaphor that I've developed around the idea of baptism. So we know the importance of ritual purity as we've discussed it already on this trip, but the idea when we start from the very north here in Tel Dan, the beginnings of the Jordan River, as you can see it's just a little trickle in spots, but as those little trickles come together very quickly we have the beginnings of the Jordan River and a lot of water coming together. The metaphor that I think is relevant for us to think about is the snow, or the beginnings, is like the purity of God. And it starts to flow down from this point here, go all the way down through the Jordan River until it hits the Dead Sea, where it's salty, nothing can live in it. So that the metaphor that I want us to think about is we have God being purity, and the water's flowing down through here, through the different tributaries at the beginning of the Jordan River into the Sea of Galilee, out again where John's baptizing. All from the very beginnings here of the Jordan River, people would have been baptizing like John, ritual immersion and purity. And as they go in, the metaphor is that sin is washed away until it ends up in the place of the Dead Sea, where it is so called the Sea of Sin, the Salt Sea, the Sea of Sin in the Dead Sea. It all goes those different names. So the metaphor and water in this place where nothing else lives. Remember we talked the other day about being separated from God. That hell, Gehenna, is separated from where there is pleasure. So likewise, sin needs to be dealt with, and in that spiritual sense, sin is contained in one location. And so we've got the metaphor throughout the land of Israel that you've got purity, and as people are washed and cleansed, that sin washes away to a place where it doesn't go anywhere else. It doesn't spread around the rest of the world like the rest of the seas and the oceans do. It's contained in one spot. Nothing lives there. Nothing is meant to live there. It is a spot which is contained purely for sin, which is separated from God. So I think it's a fascinating metaphor that we actually see the beginnings of the idea of purity occurring here. You can actually drink the water here. They've got taps at the beginning which you can drink the water from. And it's so it hasn't been treated, it's just straight out of there, pure drinking water, going all the way down to when you get a little bit further down, you don't want to be drinking the water at the baptism site. Don't go, this is great, I'm going to get filled with river water and have some sort of cleansing. You'll have a cleansing, but not the one that you're thinking about. And so, yeah, the fascinating thing, I want to share that concept. It does give that idea of spiritual washing, cleansing that has to happen in a river. And this is the major river that it happens here at.